This episode is brought to you by Love Hurts. Kiwi Kwan has had quite a career, from childhood roles in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and The Goonies to a recent Academy Award win for Everything Everywhere All at Once. But now Ki finally stars as a leading man in the film Love Hurts. Love Hurts is the perfect date night movie with its mix of over-the-top action, comedy, and a ton of heart. Love Hurts, only at theaters February 7th.
This episode is brought to you by Unstoppable. Discover the inspiring true story about Anthony Robles, who defied every expectation to become a national wrestling champion in Unstoppable, a new original movie from Amazon MGM Studios and director William Goldenberg, evoking the excitement and camaraderie of classic sports dramas and thrilling wrestling matches. Unstoppable features an all-star ensemble cast, including Jarrell Jerome, Jennifer Lopez, Don Cheadle, Michael Pena, and Bobby Cannavale. Watch Unstoppable now, exclusively on Amazon Prime Video.
It's Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, the sports podcast here at Slate. Back with you again, I am Alex Kirshner. I am a contributing writer for Slate, and I also co-host the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. This weekend, I was in Atlanta, where a couple of college football teams also were. This week, my great panel and I will talk about the College Football Playoff National Championship, won by Ohio State on Monday night. We will go through the divisional round of the NFL playoffs, which saw the postseason there finally get good after a bunch of dud wildcard games. And we will get deep into the Dodgers landing Japanese pitching phenom Roki Sasaki and what it portends or does not portend for the rest of baseball. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the biggest stories of the moment in women's sports. Lindsay, hello.
Hi. Great to be here, as always.
And of course, we have Ben Lindbergh with us. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer, and he co-hosts Effectively Wild, a baseball podcast where he has himself discussed the Roki Sasaki news. He'll expand on that here. Ben, hello.
Hi, I'm chilly. I just dropped my daughter at school. The wind chill in New York was -2. I did not literally drop my daughter, but still, I understand what Mark Andrews was dealing with.
Honestly, I can't relate to the bad weather. The weather in Los Angeles lately has been great. Things have been fine out here.
Yeah.
So,
little too
sorry
warm, if anything.
If you can't deal with the cold. Before we get into our business, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. One method of saying thanks that we like here is a bonus episode. This week, we have a show for you about perhaps a little trap laid by the outgoing Biden administration for the new Donald Trump administration as it relates to the future of college sports and women's sports in particular. We'll talk about it. You can hear that episode right now, as long as you are a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. The Ohio State Buckeyes are college football's national champions for the 9th time and the first time in a decade. That 10-year spell probably felt like about 100 to one of the most demanding fan bases in sports. And this latest title, capped off with a 34-23 win over Notre Dame on Monday, that mostly felt way more lopsided than that, but actually did get quite close for a moment at the end, is unlike any title that anyone has ever won in the long history of this sport. The Buckeyes are the first winners in the 12-team playoff format, of course, just as they were the first winners of the 4-team event that went into effect in 2014. But they've also completed the kind of whirlwind 6 weeks that has just never been quite possible in the long history of this sport. A loss at home to Michigan for a 4th year in a row on Thanksgiving weekend, essentially a statewide meltdown after that, starting with the team getting into a fight with Michigan players who had planted a flag at midfield at Ohio Stadium, legislators proposing silly bills to ban flag planting in that stadium. Most fans, I would say, wanting to fire head coach Ryan Day, and I wouldn't even say unreasonably so, though some took things way too far, got unacceptably personal with the head coach and, according to his wife, his family. And yet, they actually started playing these games in the college football playoff, and Ohio State was a total buzzsaw, every bit the marvel that people thought they might be, when a lot of us, me included, picked them before the year to win the national championship. Ben, do you think it's now reasonable for Ryan Day to get one more year at Ohio State?
Yeah, I suppose he can stay. He's earned a reprieve. It does highlight how arbitrary sports can be on multiple levels. Of course, any game can hinge on a 50-50 play that could go either way. I made a crack about Mark Andrews a moment ago, and we may return to that topic in our next segment. But the Bills' Josh Allen said it. Sometimes the ball will roll your way or it won't. That's just an instance of it rolled our way. But there's also the respect in which we just kind of arbitrarily decide how many games we're going to play and how long the season is going to be and what the playoff format is. And you might lose in one game, and if you had continued to play, you would have won best out of 3. Or if you played a best out of 5, maybe if it had gone best of 7, you would have won. So we just kind of decide when a champion is crowned or when someone is eliminated. And sometimes we change that playoff format, and that can be jarring, but it can also expose how all this, we're just sort of picking a number, and how that game goes decides what your legacy is, positive or negative. It almost makes it seem silly to ascribe so much importance to these events. Almost. That said, if we are picking whether the team that lost to Michigan or the team that's been unbeatable ever since is the real Ohio State, I'm going to go with the latter.
Ben, I think you just really need to be careful there, because I feel like you're going to talk us all out of having jobs if we
No,
if we really focus on
every word we say
on how
matters.
arbitrary and
our careers are meaningful. We're not wasting our lives.
I have to quit now. I am having an existential crisis.
Lindsay, it is kind of an amazing thing about the new format of college football that either way, when we went into this game, a team that lost to Northern Illinois was going to be the national champion, or a team that lost a second game of the year to a basically 500 Michigan team was going to win a national championship. It didn't used to be possible. I know that you are a fan of how it is now possible because you like redemption, and the Buckeyes got redemption for the first time in longer than their fans would have preferred.
Look, I think this, to me, the story of the game, I'm watching it through an Irish perspective. It mentioned how close my family is to the Notre Dame football program, my extremely Catholic family. But I think the story of this game was how Notre Dame made it a contest when it really, by all accounts, didn't look like it was going to be. It ended up being a pretty interesting and thrilling game. But the truth is, Ohio State just stayed steady when it mattered the most. And just there was a calmness to their performance that even when Notre Dame was making their comeback, I mean, I think I turned the game off to start getting ready for bed because I was going to wake up at this absurdly early hour to watch Djokovic Alcaraz at the Australian Open. So it was like, they're down, what was it, like 31-7 or 20? I don't remember the score, but it was a lot.
31-7.
31-7. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, as I'm like brushing my teeth, I check my phone and I'm like, I gotta turn this back on. So, to me, it was a much more telling and thrilling win for Ohio State because they did get pushed a little bit. There were chances within this game for them to falter, and they didn't let it happen. They have faltered in the past. We've seen them falter this season, but they managed to, play their best when it mattered the most. And that's what you want to see from your champions.
Yeah, stay tuned for Djokovic Alcaraz coverage on next week's show. But this was also a better game than it started out looking like. And we had another doink. This time,
I didn't like this one
doink,
as much.
No, sometimes the doink giveth and sometimes the doink taketh away. And I guess this field goal call was controversial to begin with, aside from the doink. But Ohio State looked pretty dominant earlier in the game, and we talked about how big the spread was, and Ohio State covered it. And really, it's kind of appropriate, narratively speaking, that Ohio State would be the champion in this first season of a new format, because it just seems like it's a team of its time. Maybe it's a bellwether of how champions are going to be constructed going forward. And it just seems like it's representative of this era, right? And I think it will go down as a great team, especially if some of the NFL prospects that this team is so stacked with make good on their potential. Then maybe we'll be looking back in the years and decades to come and saying, wow, they were all on that one championship team. No wonder it was a championship team. But even aside from that, it's just the way this team was constructed and the money that they spent and the usage of the transfer portal and all the NIL conversation just kind of feels appropriate that Ohio State would be the winner this year. It's just emblematic. Not that that gave them a boost in this game, but they didn't need one because they had that incredible talent, even though the team was put together in a way that one would not have been able to construct a college football team until fairly recently.
It's true. Of their 11 starters on defense, if you just look down the depth chart, I think even very conservatively, you would see 7 or 8 of them playing in the NFL for at least a little bit of time within the next few years. They are loaded with future NFL players at the offensive skill positions. And Ohio State this year was the embodiment of what it looks like when a very well-funded, very well-coached college football machine just comes together. I don't think that it's quite right to look at Ohio State as, strictly speaking, a mercenary program that just bought its way to the top, though that's not intended as a pejorative. Like, I think that Ohio State's $20 million roster, a figure that their athletic director more or less confirmed last night, was really a bargain for what this team brought to Ohio State, and there's no shame in spending what it costs to be competitive. But I also think that Ohio State should get some credit for the way that it used its dollars to keep people around coming into this year. You know, they did go out into the transfer portal and go shopping, so to speak, for their quarterback, Will Howard. One of their 2 great running backs, Quinshon Judkins, had been at Ole Miss. Howard had been at Kansas State. Caleb Downs, maybe the best player on the whole team. Safety came from Alabama. All of that's true. But also, Ohio State has a bunch of guys, key contributors on this team, who are 3rd, 4th, 5th-year players who maybe could have gone to the NFL last year and been not first-round picks, because an NIL deal will never keep a first-round pick in school, but mid-round picks, 2nd, 3rd-day picks in the NFL draft, who came back to school to be part of this and were compensated to do so. And you see what that yields. It's hard, and in fact, I think we've yet to see a team that's really built on the transfer portal win a national title. I don't know if we ever will. You can't win without it. You can't win without building your roster around the edges, but this was not a 1-year reload, right? Like, this was the culmination of 4 or 5 years of better roster building than I think Ohio State sometimes gets credit for.
And I guess that's not so different from what Michigan did in its championship run. Just
don't tell Michigan fans that, but yes.
Ohio State and Michigan, they're not so different. I'm sure they'll both be very receptive to that message. But yes, just keeping stars around, that is pretty important. And that's a big way that you can spend too. We're going to talk about the Dodgers later, and that's been a hallmark of their success too. Just not just spending to add people, but also being able to spend to keep your internal options around. My former colleague at The Ringer, Roger Sherman, wrote an interesting piece for his Substack where he reacted to the roughly $20 million that Ohio State is said to have spent on its roster in the opposite way from how everyone else is reacting to it, which is, wow, $20 million, that's a lot. Roger said, that's a pittance. That is nothing. That is a bargain. And in the grand scheme of sports, he's right. Of course, in the landscape of college football and how college sports have worked historically, it seems like a lot. It is a lot. But when you talk about the type of revenue that this team is bringing in, the type of attention it gets, and you compare that to other sports and what it takes to construct a champion, will we be looking back at $20 million for Ohio State and saying how quaint that people were marveling at how much money that was? I mean, what is the escalation and inflation going to look like? I guess we will talk about NIL and the future of spending on college sports in our bonus segment, and no one exactly knows what that's going to look like. But I wonder whether this is a harbinger of things to come that when we look at it in retrospect, we will say, wow, what a bargain that you could construct a roster for that small amount of money.
I think absolutely. I do think it goes back to it can't just be the money, right? You have to have a culture. You have to have a program. I mean, these players stuck around because the money obviously made it an option for them to stick around. And I got to say, I enjoyed watching this game, knowing how much money it was bringing executives and television networks and advertisers. I enjoyed it a lot more knowing that these players putting their bodies and brains on the line for our enjoyment were likely getting paid some money. So that, that's helpful that they're getting a piece of the pie, and we'll continue to get more pieces of that pie. But so much of consternation around college sports has been about the, people just leaving to go pro, that it's just this stepping stone, that there's no continuity. And let's face it, like Ohio State figured out a way to have continuity, just like, as Ben mentioned, Michigan did. Not full continuity, but, there is some honor and some enjoyment in watching these players stick around for an extra year to see if they can, make all their dreams come true, and to know that they're not, that they're able to contribute to their bottom line and their wealth while doing so. Overall, it's a sign to me that we're moving in the right direction, even if the ride to get there is a roller coaster.
Agreed. And I liked how this season was mostly talked about for the football, for the season. There are going to always be, for the next several years, until the economics settle down, stories that are kind of whiplash to cover cropping up, every week or two. There's one right now, a big transfer dispute between Wisconsin and the Big Ten and Miami and the ACC over a player who jumped from Wisconsin to Miami without going into the transfer portal. These things are going to keep happening. Like, we're going to keep having, especially as Washington, D.C. gets, as Congress and the Trump administration probably get into this, we're going to keep dealing with this, right? Like, this is going to keep being a part of the background of the sport, the way it's covered for a long time. But I like that you can still just focus on the football and enjoy good games. Lindsay, before we move on from this, I'm curious. You've talked about it before, talked about it a minute ago. You like Notre Dame. They came close, right? Like, they were in a position where with 3 minutes left, it was possible that they would win this game. It was never really as tight as it probably looked. Being down 8 points and being on defense is a hard sell. But what's your level of optimism about Marcus Freeman, about Notre Dame continuing to have chances like this over the next few years?
It's really high. I think there was a fear at the end of that first half that this was going the direction of the Alabama national championship game, which I think just left a really bad...
In 2012.
Yeah, yes. In 2012, that left a really terrible feeling across the Irish nation and the Fighting Irish fandom, because it just, you fight so hard to get there and then you're embarrassed. And to see the fight back in the third and fourth quarters, even though it fell short, like, I get that there are no moral victories. I totally understand that. But there was a lot of pride there in seeing that fight and seeing a team that it felt like it really belonged on that stage. It's got a long way to go. I really never thought that Riley Leonard was going to be the quarterback that could lead you to a national championship. But they're establishing a culture that isn't just about how good we were in the past and these historical traditions, but about how, like, this team can keep the heart of those traditions, but modernize enough and, utilize things like grad transfers so you can kind of get around some enrollment, get a little bit easier to get the academics in these transfers and compete and really, truly belong. I think Marcus Freeman is just a really special coach. He's just got this aura about him. And I left this feeling shockingly good for, we didn't even cover, the Irish didn't even cover the spread, but I wasn't devastated, and really nobody in my group chats were devastated. I'm not going to act like I'm the biggest Notre Dame fan there is, but there was just a lot of pride in making that in not letting this go the way of 2012.
And of course, Ohio State would say that a lot of their success comes down to culture and camaraderie and chemistry and character. So we'll see whether that continues to be true. I guess the downside of having such a talented roster is that you run the risk of losing a lot of those players because they transfer again or they go to the draft. So I have one last question for you, Alex, before we move on, now that we have a wrap on this playoff format. It was a record 38-day bowl season, which, as Neil Payne has pointed out, was about twice as long as the average before the 14 playoff. And 18 of the 38 were off days, half of which came from the break between the semifinals and the championship game. 32 of those 38 days were the playoff itself. 16 games played by those winners, so in that sense, we got a good look at their true talent, but it took a long time to play this out. Now, we got great matchups, and the right teams felt like they were there at the end. Did this feel like the right length to you? Was it a big adjustment? We're a long way from interminable NHL, NBA playoff length here, but still, it's a shock to the system. Is it a good shock or sometimes a bad shock too?
I think this was a good shock. It didn't feel unnatural to me that there was still college football happening on Martin Luther King Day. It didn't feel like this was dragging incessantly. But be careful. Basically, every sports product has shown over time that it can dilute itself in some way or another, and have games and a time of the year where people just stop being as interested in it. The NFL hasn't, but everyone else in my experience has. I think 12 is a pretty good number. It's not going to surprise me if it goes to 14. I don't personally feel we need more than that. I think what we have now is enough for the thing that we've talked about so often, which is teams to be able to dream about access and feel like their games matter. But also, it's plenty to include all of the teams that have even a 1% chance at actually winning the thing. So maybe a little bit more room to grow in the name of the television dollar, but I wouldn't be especially thrilled if it gets bigger than like 16, and I'm pretty cool with 12, the way that it is.
Yeah.
Speaking of 16, that's more teams than the NFL puts in its playoff, and the NFL has expanded its playoffs in the last couple of years, going from 12 to 14. On wildcard weekend, that did not look very necessary. The games weren't very good, but this weekend, the NFL playoffs look pretty good. We'll talk about it after the break.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
Head to Whole Foods Market to jumpstart your January during our New Year boosting event with savings on feel-good favorites store-wide. Save on organic picks, wellness staples, and more all month long.
Gonna roll, flip it, got it! Oh, the ball was dropped! He had the two-point conversion in his hands!
You just heard it, or you just heard maybe the most dramatic moment of it, the Mark Andrews drop that Ben Lindbergh so gleefully joked about in the opening. Tough one, Ben, for the Baltimore Ravens, who had a two-point conversion to tie the Buffalo Bills late in the fourth quarter of the divisional playoffs and could not do it. Tough day for Mark Andrews all around.
Very, and I feel bad for him and just generally for fans of the Ravens and also Lamar Jackson specifically, who was clearly very frustrated. Of course, he had a quote that made the rounds, "Hold on to the fucking ball. I'm sorry for my language, but this shit is annoying. I'm tired of this shit." When I first read that, I thought, wow, that was harsh. But he wasn't actually referring to Mark Andrews. That was kind of a collective hold on to the fucking ball. He was including himself in that complaint because he also failed to hold on to the ball once on a sack, to be fair. and he threw a pick. And it was just kind of a continuation of what has happened to him throughout his playoff career, where he has the stats, and the stats say that he was overall almost dominant, except for some pretty big misses and some pretty important turnovers. And it's tough because these are the things that narratives are built on, or at least are reinforced by. And this big Bills-Ravens battle, you know, the MVP candidates going against each other, it turned out not to be that quarterback-centric a game, really. But ultimately, it's something that Lamar will be saddled with, and that's sort of sad. You know, again, last year it was Zay Flowers who fumbled late at the goal line against the Chiefs, and this year Flowers was, of course, unavailable, which I guess maybe reinforces the idea that doing the Saquon Barkley approach, maybe there's some sense in that. Take that last game of the regular season off in order to prepare yourself for the playoffs. But it was a weird weekend of football just in general. A good weekend, lots of entertaining games, but every losing team outgained the winner.
Yeah, Lindsay, they say that man plans and God laughs, and the Detroit Lions certainly had plans. They went 15-2. They had a ton of injuries, but this was their best shot probably ever to win the Super Bowl. That didn't work out. The Washington Commanders are going to face the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC Championship, and the Bills are going to go and play the Chiefs in the rematch that we and every other podcast in the world has wondered about all season. What was the most devastating loss in your mind that somebody took over divisional playoff weekend?
It was almost hard to watch the Ravens versus Bills game because of how much legacy I felt like was on the line for both quarterbacks who are young enough in their careers and talented enough this isn't going to be defining, but it's starting to become defining, right? Like these narratives are starting to not become hot takes about whether or not, you know, in this case now we know like Lamar is able to win it when it matters the most. I mean, he's obviously one of the best. I think he will win MVP this year, and that's very well deserved. But it was making me a little nauseous because it just felt I want to see both of these teams be able to exercise the demons that the Kansas City Chiefs have put upon the entire AFC these past few years. Because, you know, these quarterbacks, you know, a lot of the other talented players on their team, it just feels like they deserve more than, you know, ending before even the conference championships. So I do think that is, you know, the way that the Ravens lost is a gut punch, and they made so many mistakes. I mean, there was a really big Derrick Henry drop. There was, of course, we've talked about Lamar threw a terrible interception, and Mark Andrews had a fumble before his big 2-point conversion drop. So that's going to stick with them. But I think that the Lions' loss to the Commanders might be what I remember the most because of how good they looked during the regular season and how it really felt like this was their conference to lose and to not even get to the conference championships after the season they've had, after the couple of years they've had, and to lose in the way that they did, which is, of course, all the defensive injuries coming to bite them, but also Jared Goff looking like he did not simply belong on this stage. I mean, he threw for over 300 yards, but he's the veteran in this game, veteran quarterback, and he had 3 interceptions. Whereas Jayden Daniels, you know, he had 0 turnovers in this game. And to me, that's the most impressive stat. So I think both the Lions and the Ravens are going to be ruining what happened this weekend for a long time.
Yeah, I would also say the Lions. And look, we sang the praises of Daniels on last week's show, and we even kind of previewed how things could go south for the Lions if they did go south, pointing out that they were so shorthanded defensively. They got even more shorthanded as the game went on. It got to the point where you wondered whether they would have enough players to field to actually keep playing. But it was also just that they tried to compensate with the blitz, as they had been doing with some success. And as we noted previously, Daniels has just eaten the blitz for lunch. And that was what was happening here. And I guess you could criticize the Lions for not straying from their game plan, but I don't know that they had any other option at this point. And yet their offense was so potent that they still scored 31 points. And you could see just how explosive this team can be. And they were so dominant during the regular season that it is sort of a shame that they were as diminished as they were by the time the playoffs rolled around, which is not to take anything away from Daniels, because he is really putting together a very convincing case as the best rookie ever. I don't think that is too hyperbolic to say. I mean, statistically speaking, you can support that given the success that he's had here in the playoffs, on the road, just refusing to make any mistakes, making the big plays, converting on fourth down as they've done all season. It's just incredible, the skill and the poise he has shown here.
It is. On the other side, Jared Goff threw the ball to the Commanders 3 times in this game. And, Goff was not the only reason that Detroit had a problem here. But I do think this was a really stark illustration of, if you have the guy, you have everything. And if you don't, you don't, at the quarterback position. Like, the Washington Commanders have this dude, Jayden Daniels. He is going to spend his entire career there, or at least until he's basically done and on the downslope. They will never let him go. And as a result, most years, they're going to be right there. And they're going to have opportunities to win playoff games because they have one of the 7 or 8 quarterbacks in the NFL. Maybe that's a liberal estimate of the number, but one of the handful of quarterbacks in the NFL who is just a complete differentiator. Jared Goff has grown a lot the past few years in Detroit since he came over from the Rams, where he was the number 1 overall pick and got them to a Super Bowl where he played very poorly. But there's just a difference, right, between like the caliber of a quarterback that you can win with, which is Goff, and having a game-breaking, franchise-altering, complete stud at the position. Commanders have that. And for that reason, get used to them. They're going to be around for a very, very long time. And I'm excited about that. Like, Lindsay, I'm happy for people in our shared previous city and all around the DMV that they get to enjoy this. Like, there were very few more joyless franchises over the last 20 years or so than this one. And it's just kind of a breath of fresh air to see what a Daniel Snyder-less but Jayden Daniels present Washington team can do.
I agree. There's Mike Sando of The Athletic in his column started it off this week with a great stat. He said, let's count the days since the NFL's final 4 teams last tasted the championship round. It's been 358 days for the Kansas City Chiefs, 722 days for the Eagles, 1,457 days for the Bills, and 12,062 days for the Commanders. If you can't do the math very quickly, that goes back to January of 1992. So, yeah, tortured is the proper word there for more reasons than just on-field ineptitude. And, Daniels just really is. He's so calm. Every time they show him on the sidelines, he's just calm. Even after the wins, he's not losing his mind. He's just, you can tell that he feels to his bones. It is a fact to him that this is where he belongs, which I think is why these moments haven't gotten too big for him. Now, will he have moments? Of course, where he looks like a rookie. I mean, veterans have great quarterbacks have moments where the game makes them look ridiculous. But what is showing, and I absolutely think the Commanders have a chance against the Eagles. I mean, he will be the best quarterback on the field again, and that gives them a chance.
Yeah, 2 of the 4 teams that have never appeared in a Super Bowl were in these playoffs. They're out now, though you do still have the Bills to root for if you're rooting for star-crossed teams that have never won one. I think we've talked so much about the quarterbacks, and so many of these teams have been so quarterback-centric, and we've had so many star quarterbacks in these playoffs. The Eagles are sort of the exception, where Jalen Hurts, he is contributing, but mostly with his feet, because the Eagles had 65 net passing yards. Passes, we don't need no stinking passes. I think they had almost 300 rushing yards from Barkley and Hurts. And Hurts, of course, coming back from the injury, and maybe he's still kind of getting things together. And can they keep doing this? Just the efficiency that they had, I think 8.5 yards per rushing attempt, 0.31 expected points, was old school. It was kind of fun. And then meanwhile, in the other game that we haven't talked about yet, where one team that has not appeared in the Super Bowl yet was eliminated, neither the Chiefs nor the Texans covered themselves in glory here, but it was kind of a classic, the Trump meme, I guess, about old Patty Mahomes. Surely can't wriggle out of this one. And nevertheless. And of course, some people would suggest that perhaps he had help wriggling out of things thanks to some of the refs. But it was kind of a classic Chiefs. How did they pull this one out? There was the fun fact going around that the Texans were the first team to outgain their opponent by 100+ yards, not turn the ball over and lose a postseason game. Previous teams meeting all those criteria were 49-0 in the playoffs. And of course, as my old podcast partner Sam Miller used to say, all fun facts lie. They're all a little manipulative. And this one maybe ignores the fact that there was a big difference in the starting field position. And then the Chiefs lost a lot of yards on penalties, 27 yards on killing the clock. So, okay. But the general point holds up, which is that the Chiefs have been doing this all season, and all season people have been saying this can't keep up and regression will surely strike. And here they are, not far away from winning yet another title by just doing this with a less effective team and a less compelling and watchable version of the team that they've had for the past several years, but ultimately getting the win, and it's tough to bet against them continuing to do that.
Quick note on the Houston Texans, by the way, who are no longer a factor in these playoffs. I am amazed at how often the NFL puts them in that Saturday afternoon television slot when they are in the playoffs. I looked into this before their wild card game against the Chargers. In the wild card round, they've played 8 games in their franchise history, every single one of them as the 4 seed playing at home, and slotted into the first game of the weekend on Saturday afternoon at the time when the NFL figures the weekend is just warming up and probably the fewest people are watching. They played another Saturday afternoon game here against the Chiefs. The NFL and its broadcast partners seem to just have no respect for the Houston Texans whatsoever, no desire to showcase them. And, I ultimately can't blame them, but that's just an aside. The NFL clearly just has this level of disrespect for a team in one of the largest cities in the country. Can't believe it.
I have a question. Are we, as a collective, pro or anti snow football? Because I know my opinion, but by listening to NFL podcasts, my opinion, which I thought was universal, is seemingly not universal. So
I am strongly pro, aesthetically speaking, at least, just in terms of the
so
visuals
cool
on the broadcast. It looks incredible, right? When I play a football video game, I'm always turning on the snow because I just generally like snow. Winter is my favorite season. Snow is my favorite type of precipitation. I guess you could say that it leads to sloppiness. And if you just want to see the best brand of football and the highest caliber of play with a little less randomness coming down more to talent, then you would want more temperate, dry conditions. But I always like a snow game.
Same. I understand with some regret why the Buffalo Bills are putting a roof on their new stadium. Like, if you're going to be a modern venue and get taxpayer dollars, you should probably weatherproof it, make it safe for the largest number of people. Not everyone can be out there in the snow. I get it. I don't even oppose it. As a matter of public works. But something sad happens when you take snow out of play at the end of the football season. No question.
I also have a question. We've talked about how top-heavy this playoff field is and just how we have this handful of really great teams who collectively seemed very strongly favored to win a Super Bowl. The upside of that is that we get a few different Super Bowl quality matchups in these playoffs. The downside is that we have a bunch of Super Bowl quality championship caliber teams getting eliminated prior to the Super Bowl. So is this a good thing or a bad thing? Are you glass half full or glass half empty on this, that we're getting to see a number of premier matchups between really great teams, but a number of teams are just not going to be there when that final matchup arrives?
I suppose it's always been part of sports, right, Lindsay? Like, the Miracle on Ice game was a semifinal. Chiefs-Bills is going to have the biggest feel of any NFL game this year just because of what these two quarterbacks are at this point in their careers. It's not the Super Bowl, but I'll probably still watch the Super Bowl, even though the AFC Championship will have felt bigger.
I'm definitely glass half full with this. I mean, as sad as I was to see both the Lions and the Ravens go down the way they did, they didn't earn it. Like, you're not in the you have to earn your way to the conference championships, and those teams have not been able to pull it together. And it tells you something about them, whether that's fair or not, and you can decide how much to weigh that versus regular season greatness. But it doesn't bother me. I will say, I think one of my favorite moments of the favorite, as in painful but just ridiculous, was when the Detroit Lions, who have no defense left, got a too many men on the field penalty at a crucial moment. It just right. Summed it up.
It's actually your problem is too few men.
It just summed it up. And also, too many men. I would like to give that penalty flag often in life. I feel like we should be able to just kind of throw that out there in many occasions. And that should be penalized in lots of different ways. But just my take.
I've always felt that too many men on the field is a much less classy penalty than the more refined 12 men in the huddle penalty. Because who among us hasn't needed 11 of our boys with us in the huddle? But once it's playtime, it's time to get off the field. After the break, Major League Baseball's rich have gotten richer, except, well, they didn't really, because it's pretty clear that the Los Angeles Dodgers' latest big addition was not, in fact, about the dollars and cents.
Hello, Slate listeners. This is Felix Salmon from Slate Money. I'm sure you've been seeing the headlines from Los Angeles, the wildfires there, the insurance situation there, the prisoners working on the ground as firefighters. So, what's really happening, and what are the implications of all of this? We just had an episode of Slate Money. It's called The Dire Costs of the LA Fires. My co-hosts Emily Peck and Elizabeth Spires and I talk through questions like why people are so fixated on the celebrity homes that have been destroyed.
I think people are focusing on celebrities right now, partly because the bigger macro problems are really overwhelming and terrifying.
Where California needs to go from here, and how we should be thinking about the use of inmates as firefighters, and whether this choice given to inmates is really a choice at all.
It's an offer you can't refuse.
Listen to The Dire Costs of the LA Fires on Slate Money today.
A few weeks ago, Ben and I talked on this show in a week when Lindsay was out about the impending arrival in Major League Baseball of Roki Sasaki, a 23-year-old Japanese pitching phenom who's been a star the past few years in Japan. Sasaki, like Shohei Ohtani before him, was a particularly valuable get because he is so young that he was ineligible to sign for more than a team's total pool of international amateur free agent money, which is just a few $1,000,000. And he would then start on the minimum salary and have to play 6 years before free agency. In other words, Sasaki wouldn't just go to one of a few teams that spends the most money on talent. He'd go where he wanted to go. And in the end, he went to one of those teams anyway. Ben, he's a Los Angeles Dodger now. He'll even pay California income tax to do it, while making not that much money, especially by Major League Baseball standards. I guess there are reasons beyond cash to go and join the boys in blue.
There are, which is what makes this extra frustrating for fans of the 29 other teams, though it's tough to keep up with Dodgers additions because, of course, they made a major signing since adding Roki Sasaki. They signed probably the best reliever on the free agent market, Tanner Scott, and that did actually require more money. But Sasaki is emblematic of how the Dodgers have done this in a sense. In one sense, yeah, they're the Buckeyes of baseball. Their payroll is approaching $400 million, so maybe it's more like the Buckeyes payroll times 20. But they also have a compelling pitch to potential free agents, which is not just we will pay you more money than other teams will. In some cases, they don't even have to offer as much as other teams do, including Sasaki's case. There were other teams that were willing to pay him more. But players are now just deciding to be Dodgers based on other factors, based on the fact that the Dodgers have been incredibly successful. They have been in the playoffs for a dozen years in a row. They have a convenient location. If you're a player who's coming from Asia, you're on the West Coast. You're in Southern California, which, not Los Angeles lately, but at least most of the time is an appealing climate and place to be. Of course, lots of endorsement opportunities. It's the center of celebrity. It's a historic franchise. There are all of these other advantages that other teams can't compete with. And so what's the answer to the Dodgers snapping up everyone? Part of it, too, is that they have a track record of developing players and improving players. And reportedly, Sasaki's question that he posed to all of his suitors was, why did I lose a little fastball speed? How can I get it back? And so he had all of these teams falling over themselves to provide information and intel to him that he can now use against them, ultimately, telling them why he lost a little speed or how he could improve. And the Dodgers have a reputation for being the best at that, basically, with the caveat that also a lot of their pitchers tend to break for one reason or another. So the only thing making sports fans more upset than penalty calling on behalf of Patrick Mahomes is the Dodgers signing everyone. And I don't know what the answer is because they just have a pitch to players that no other team can match.
Lindsay, for my part, I'm not mad at the Dodgers. I'm mad at my team, the Pittsburgh Pirates, for not only not spending money, but not crafting any other kind of compelling pitch to free agents or anybody for why they should want to play there. I wonder where your anger meter is at Chavez Ravine.
I think this is ultimately going to make everybody better. It's going to force these front offices to up their game, and not just financially, but in their presentations, in the way they are recruiting players, and the way they are presenting amenities, and the way they are establishing culture. I think that the problem isn't that the Dodgers are being too aggressive or too ambitious. It's that everyone else is not being nearly ambitious enough. And I love that they won the World Series, and instead of, just patting themselves on the back and, treading water, they're going out and being super aggressive this off season. And of course, they have a lot of resources to do so, more so than a lot of teams. But let's face it, there are plenty of teams who aren't using the resources they have, that aren't even trying. And that is ridiculous and stupid. And that's who I'm mad at. If I'm mad at anyone in the situation, which I'm really not. I have to say, I'm obsessed with Sasaki asking this question to everyone about why did his velocity fall off. This is one of my favorite reporting nuggets and favorite things I've ever heard of a player do during a, free agency type situation, a recruitment type situation. It's absolutely brilliant. I mean, you get so much intel, you get to learn, and you get to hear about how these teams problem solve instead of just hearing them, kind of tell you how great you are over and over again. Like, you want teams that are going to push you. I absolutely love this. Has you ever heard of anything similar, Ben?
Well, I think a big part now of team success is whether they can improve players, whether they can take players and maximize their talent. I co-wrote a book about that. So I think a big part of any really free agent decision is, will this team make me better? Can they unlock something, or can they postpone a decline that's coming? And a lot of people are upset at Sasaki because they think that maybe he knew he was going to go to the Dodgers all along, and so he was just milking everyone for information. That's his prerogative, if that's the case, but we'll never really know what was in his mind. His agent had sent signals that, maybe he's more receptive to a small market team. And then ultimately he ended up signing with the Dodgers, which is where everyone thought he would sign. So, I don't think there's anything nefarious about it. Is it slightly seedy, perhaps, if he had made up his mind before this whole dog and pony show happened? Perhaps, but it could have very well been a good faith tour of the league. And hey, who can make me better? And maybe the Dodgers just had the best answer here. And I do agree that the greater evil, at least, is teams not trying compared to the Dodgers trying too hard, trying too well. And just this weekend, as everyone was ranting about the Dodgers, you had Cubs owner Tom Ricketts sort of pretending that the Cubs can't compete for big players and talking about how their goal is to break even every year. And you had...
Show us the books, Tom. Show us the books.
He's talked about biblical losses in the past and, of course, has never actually documented them. And yes, the Pirates had a fan fest at which they misspelled Andrew McCutchen's surname, which he was a good sport about. But Bob Nutting didn't show, and it's probably for the best that he didn't, because there were sell the team chants going on, and Ben Cherington, their GM, was asked why they haven't signed a free agent to a multi-year deal, an outside free agent, at least during his tenure. And he said, we've tried and we'll continue to try. So we're pulling for you, Pirates. Sign a single outside free agent to a multi-year deal.
And also talked about how, the ultimate thing that's going to make someone like Paul Skeens want to sign an extension with the Pirates is winning.
Right.
Not money.
Right.
Winning.
It would help
yes.
to spend some money if you want to win. Of course, the correlation there is not exact, but it does provide a bit of a buffer. And meanwhile, you have a team like the Marlins, Tanner Scott's former team, that haven't signed really a single notable free agent this offseason, despite being in line to earn at least $70 million in revenue sharing. At present, their payroll is roughly the same amount. So that's bad. Now, could you say that the Dodgers maybe are the opposite extreme and their downsides to that too? Yeah, I think you could, in the sense that there's so much talent being concentrated on this single roster right now that if you were some sort of benevolent deity and you could just distribute the talent wealth throughout the league, maybe the Blue Jays would have benefited from Roki Sasaki more than the Dodgers, who already had the best rotation in baseball. And now it's just an embarrassment of riches, literal and figurative. And it does become kind of predictable and boring at a certain point. You want to get excited. Oh, where's this guy going to go? And then he just ends up on the Dodgers. And meanwhile, you have the Dodgers in a division with a couple of teams that have done what we have urged teams to do. The Padres and the Diamondbacks, who have spent above their market size means and have really made a good effort, a good faith effort to compete. And they just don't quite have the resources that the Dodgers do, and they don't have the depth that the Dodgers do. And so these are good teams that are contending, and yet they have essentially no chance to win the NL West. Now, as we've discussed, baseball is constructed in such a way that you can't actually buy a championship. And I don't think that baseball has a serious competitive balance problem on the whole, compared even to salary-capped leagues. If you look at just the number of teams that have made the playoffs, the number of teams that have won World Series, it's been a quarter century since a World Series winner repeated. And just this past year, we were talking about how there are no super teams anymore and no one won more than 98 games. Of course, it was the Dodgers winning 98 games, but still, no one was really head and shoulders above the pack. And baseball fans kind of complain whichever way we have it. If it's 2023 and you have Rangers versus Diamondbacks, then you complain, oh, it's too random and there's too many upsets and where are all the good teams? And then you have Dodgers Yankees and everyone says, oh, you buy championships. So one way or another, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I certainly don't blame fans for being frustrated. And yes, you can say be mad at your owners for not trying to compete with the Dodgers. I think they can be mad at both. And you can have the Dodgers be a villain as well as being upset at Bob Nutting. And to be fair, even though there are a lot of teams that could spend more than they do, the Dodgers do have certain institutional advantages that are singular or at least unusual in the sense that they have an $8.5 billion TV deal that runs for almost 15 more years. So at a time of broadcast uncertainty and revenue uncertainty, the Dodgers do just have deeper pockets. But again, it's not the case that most teams are actually emptying out their shallower pockets.
I have a technical question. I know Alex addressed this a little bit in the intro, and maybe everyone in the world understands this but me. But can you explain a little bit what this loophole is for this international free agent money and why they were able to get him for cheaper? Like, I don't understand the mechanisms of that.
Yeah, there's a rule that if you're under 25, essentially it has to do with age and also your service time in an international league, then you have to sign a minor league contract, basically. You are placed in the same bucket as a 16-year-old kid in the Dominican who is signing as an amateur. And it's sort of silly that someone like Roki Sasaki or previously Shohei Ohtani would be grouped in that same category, but it's because of the age. It's because these guys were 23 when they opted to come over. And both of them passed up a big payday potentially in the short term, because if they had waited a couple more years till they were 25, then they could have cashed in the way that fellow Dodger and fellow member of the Samurai Japan rotation Yoshinobu Yamamoto did last offseason when he was 25. Because they're 23, they are deferring payment, not in the Dodgers deferring payment kind of way, but just saying, I will make good now. I'll bet on myself. If I succeed in the majors, then I'll cash in down the road the way that Ohtani did. But in theory, that makes it harder for a team like the Dodgers to collect all that talent because they can't just outspend everyone to get those top prospects, except for the fact that they've made themselves such a desirable location by having, I think we could say, the most successful regular season team, era adjusted of all time. We really haven't seen a run like they have had over the past dozen years or any number of years in between since, earlier eras, pre-free agency, pre the draft, pre-integration even. So this is what a dynasty looks like in modern baseball, where it's just really hard to repeat because the playoffs are so random and there are so many rounds. To win the division year in and year out and keep getting yourself back to that point, that's a dynasty. That's a modern dynasty. And the Dodgers have the depth and the money that they can weather a lot of attrition like they did last offseason, where they lost an entire team or two's rotation and still had enough arms standing that they could go all the way.
Does it exist? Does that rule exist to help these international leagues or to protect teams from themselves? I guess that's kind of what I'm curious about. Who is that helping?
The owners, mostly.
Okay.
Yes.
Any
With a
restriction
non-unionized labor force.
And any restriction on spending, it's just a way to depress salaries, of course, ultimately. But it is ostensibly a competitive balance measure, which in a way makes it more ironic that the Dodgers
right.
now have made things more unbalanced. But look, I think they get a bad rap in a lot of ways. We've talked at length about deferred contracts and how they didn't invent that, and there's nothing actually against the rules about it, and there are a lot of misconceptions about the way that works and the way it benefits them, and they're not alone. The Blue Jays missed out on Sasaki. They went and signed Anthony Santander to a heavily deferred contract, so that's not just the Dodgers. But I do wonder, there's just so much ire out there, some of it justified, some of it not, that the sentiment among really the hoi polloi, among the mainstream baseball fan, is really in favor of a cap, even in, I think, a more pro-labor era, certainly in terms of the coverage and the media, there's a lot of momentum toward, we got to get a cap. This is unfair. And even though some of that is ill-advised, I do wonder, because the owners, obviously, they've pushed for that in the past. They will push for it again. And it's got to come with a floor. And if the floor is acceptably high, then in theory, most people would be okay with a cap. But the players are not going to just roll over and accept that, as unions in other leagues have ultimately been forced to do. But if the Dodgers spending so much and being so good really isolates them, even among the owners, where small and mid-market owners are saying, we got to do something about the Dodgers here, the way that people were complaining about Steve Cohen's spending with the Mets a couple years ago, and they put in a so-called Cohen tax in the current CBA. And, the Mets didn't even make the playoffs that year. So that just goes to show you how some of these concerns can be overblown and the Dodgers could easily get eliminated in the first round. But heading into the next CBA negotiations, and the CBA does expire at the end of 2026, it's going to get contentious. And I think the owners are going to push harder than they have before for that. And if there are some players who are miffed or disgruntled because they didn't get in on the Dodgers gravy train and they're looking up at LA and saying, why can't we win and put together this super team? Who knows? Maybe even their resistance will be a little less stiff.
I'm not saying that there can never be an economic system with a salary cap in baseball that is good for everyone. And if it's paired with a high enough salary floor that it doesn't even work for the players and that it might not, lead to more teams being competitive. It's hard to disprove something that hasn't happened. But it is pretty clear to me right now that the biggest threat to competitive balance in Major League Baseball is not the lack of a salary cap. It is the lack of a salary floor.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree. And, we've talked about it. Joe Sheehan has written about it. Maybe if there's less broadcast revenue coming in, less of a built-in windfall for some of these owners, then they will have to compete. They will have to put a competitive and compelling product on the field because suddenly attendance will matter more and they will actually have to get people to pay to watch their team. And look, people will probably pay to watch the Dodgers, even if it is to hate them and root against them and savor their failures. They are going to be incredibly entertaining to watch because this team is just so stacked talent-wise. And a lot of their strengths, drafting well and scouting well and developing well, they're not even really relying on that anymore because this team that used to be homegrown at the beginning of their run is not anymore. It is more accurate to say that this is a collection of mercenaries because they're very few, Will Smith aside. There's almost no one who actually came from the Dodgers system. So they've transitioned into this different era where they have actually gone and gotten those elite talents. But in a lot of cases, teams have just handed them to them. The Dodgers wouldn't have Freddie Freeman if Atlanta had kept him. They wouldn't have Mookie Betts if the Red Sox had kept him. And so some of these players just aren't available to them unless other teams decide we're not going to pony up. And that does keep happening. And the Dodgers keep taking advantage of that. So this is a team just firing on all cylinders, playing money ball with money. And at least in the regular season, they're pretty unstoppable because you can't buy a championship, but you can at least have a big down payment toward a division title.
It's time for Afterballs. Over the weekend, the new women's basketball 3-on-3 league Unrivaled debuted. It was absolutely electric. The league was founded by Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier and is a very by-players, for-players feel. And fittingly, it was Brianna Stewart, aka Stewie, who scored the first basket in Unrivaled history from her signature mid-range jumper. Even though her team missed BC Basketball Club, ended up losing to Collier's Lunar Owls BC, it was still a great moment of marking history by Stewie. It got me curious about the other first baskets in the history of leagues. In the WNBA, it was Penny Toller of the Los Angeles Sparks who scored the first goal. And in the NBA, it was Oscar Benjamin Schechtman from the New York Knicks who scored and is credited with the first basket in NBA history. He went by Ozzie. And Ozzie, before he became a New York Knick in 1946, he only played one season, the 46 to 47 season for the Knicks. Before that, he was on a team called the Philadelphia Sphas, SPHAS, from 1941 to 1946. I was very curious because I had not heard that nickname before. And it turns out the Philadelphia Sphas, it is an acronym derived from the South Philadelphia Hebrew Association. They were known as one of the best Jewish basketball teams of all time, and quite the storied history in both Pennsylvania basketball and in American basketball overall, as they were part of the American Basketball League, which was a rival to the NBA in the early days. The Sphas, for a while, did not have a home court, and they were known as the Wandering Jews. So, Ben, who is your Wandering Jew?
Well, I'm half Jewish, so I am sometimes. But I want to give a shout out to listener Luke Martin, who pointed out on Blue Sky that when we talked about TGL, Tomorrow's Golf League, last week and wished it were more like supersized mini golf, we were essentially describing the premise of Holy Moly, the ABC reality show that ran from 2019 to 2022 and was executive produced by Steph Curry, who also surprisingly starred as the series' resident golf pro. So apologies for not giving Holy Moly its due. Go stream it on Netflix and maybe they'll make a fifth season someday. But I'm here today to talk not about Holy Moly, but goalie goals. Because, my friends, Josh Allen outdueling Lamar Jackson was not the most magical sporting event to take place in Buffalo over the weekend. No, the Pittsburgh Penguins were in town to play the Sabres on Friday, and Penguins goalie Alex Nedeljkovic did this.
And the Sabres play it back down to the Penguins zone. Nedeljkovic is going to go for the empty net. He's got a chance. Alex Nedeljkovic scores! A moment frozen in time. Nedeljkovic with the goalie goal as he caps off a magical night here in Buffalo.
You can hear the excitement. It was a wonder to behold. The puck got dumped along the boards, and Nedeljkovic left the crease, stopped it behind his net, spun around, and lifted it into the air toward the opposing goal just before he got clobbered by the Sabres' Sam Lafferty. As the puck made the long, exciting slide to glory, Nedeljkovic skated straight over to the Penguins' bench, jumped onto it, and got mobbed by his teammates. Nedeljkovic had a historic game. He made 40 saves, which was his main job, but he also scored that goal to give the Penguins a 5-2 lead with 2:42 to go in the third period, and earlier was credited with an assist. He is, in fact, the first goalie ever to score a goal and an assist in the same game. So he was a fight away from a goalie Gordie Howe hat trick. And although it was his first goal in the NHL, it was his record fourth professional goal because he scored twice in the AHL and once in the ECHL, making him the first goalie to score at all three North American pro levels. I've wanted to do it for a long time, and to be able to have the opportunity to do it, it was nice to bury it, Nedeljkovic said. He noted that he's always enjoyed playing the puck, which he credits to his dad, Butch, who advised him, "Don't just throw the puck around the boards. Every time you get it, try to make a smart play with it." Nedeljkovic also credited puck-handling goalies he grew up watching, like Martin Brodeur and Marty Turco, and then, a man after my own heart, he reeled off a list of all the goalie goals he could remember. It is not a very long list, which is what makes its members so special. In the early days of hockey, goalies would sometimes skate down the ice like offensive players, but that grew rare as the position became more specialized and the padding and equipment more cumbersome. Later, it became illegal after a game in Montreal in 1966 in which Maple Leafs goalie Gary Suitcase Smith tried to become the first goalie to score a goal. In a 1997 interview, he recalled, "This was in the old 6-team NHL, and I didn't know if I'd ever play another game. They scored 3 or 4 goals, and I thought, I'm going to get the hook. What can I do to make people remember that I played in the NHL? So I thought I would go down the ice and try to score. J.C. Tremblay didn't know what to do. He never hit a guy in his life, but then he decided to take a run at me. He nailed me. I was at their blue line, and I was spinning around." Other goalies, including the Rangers' Chuck Rayner, had tried this before, also unsuccessfully. But after Smith took that hit, the NHL instituted Rule 27.7. If a goalkeeper participates in the play in any manner, intentionally plays the puck or checks an opponent when he is beyond the center red line, a minor penalty shall be imposed upon him. This penalty actually got called on Patrick Waugh in 1997 when he took the puck up the ice, deked Wayne Gretzky, and did a spin move across the red line.
3.5 minutes to go, third period. Rangers with a 4-1 lead. Patrick, look at this. What is this? He's out of his mind. There's a penalty now. He carried the puck over center ice. You can't do that as a goalie. He doesn't realize it. That is it. Patrick's nuts. Look at Dvorsky. And the fans love it. I thought he was going to break right for the net. That's incredible.
So the goalie has to stay on his side of the ice, which means that to score, he typically has to shoot the puck past a few defenders into a 6-foot wide opening from almost 180 feet away. And if he misses, it's icing, unless the team is playing shorthanded. So it's rarely attempted, especially with only a 1-goal lead, both because it's risky and because it's hard, which has limited the all-time tally to now 19 goals by 16 goalies, starting with Billy Smith in 1979. In baseball, there have been 15 unassisted triple plays and 24 perfect games. So those 19 goalie goals slot in right between those two figures. However, that actually overstates the frequency of a Nedeljkovic-style goal, because there are two ways one could be credited with a goalie goal: by actually putting the puck in the net, or by being the last player on the team to touch the puck before an opposing player scores an own goal. The latter was the way Billy Smith scored, quote unquote. So of the 19 goalie goals, only 12 have been the Nedeljkovic kind, beginning in 1987 with Ron Hextall, who would become the only goalie to score on shots twice. I'm pleased to report, though, that we are living in the golden age of the goalie goal. In the 15 seasons from 2002-2003 through 2017-18, only one goalie, Mike Smith, scored on a shot. But goalies are now on an unprecedented streak of scoring on shots in 3 consecutive seasons, or 4 if you exclude the COVID-shortened 2020-2021 season. And in another first, we've had 2 goalie goals already this season, because Philip Gustafsson of the Minnesota Wild put one into an empty net back in October. You might wonder why goalies are suddenly lighting the lamp every season. I'm sure goalies have gotten better at handling the puck, as with any pro sport, players are constantly increasing in skill and athleticism, but mostly I think it's because they have more opportunities to score, ironically because of a greater tendency to remove goalies. Pulling the goalie, a strategy introduced to the NHL by the Bruins' Art Ross in 1931, has become much more common in recent years, thanks in part to the aforementioned Patrick Waugh, who did it aggressively when he became a head coach. But pulling the goalie has gotten a big assist from analytics, which have supported pulling goalies earlier and more often. It's a little like other sabermetrically sound strategies we've seen gain ground in other sports, like going for it on 4th down, trying a 2-point conversion, shooting a 3, or swinging for the fences. Analytically speaking, the reward justifies the risk, because if you don't do it, you'll probably lose anyway. As a result, there are more empty net situations, and empty net goals have skyrocketed. About 7% of goals this season have been empty netters, roughly double the rate of a decade ago, and quadruple the rate back when Hextall scored the first true goalie goal. Put another way, there are roughly 0.4 empty net goals per game now, so 1 every 2.5 games. 20 years ago, it was more like 1 every 7 games, and back when Gary Smith tried to score and got flattened, it was 1 every 20 games. Some fans are concerned about how all those empty net goals are distorting scoring and padding points totals. Alex Ovechkin has a record 61 empty net goals, and some people have tried to discount his pursuit of Gretzky's goals record because of that, even though Gretzky had 56 empty netters himself. An empty net goal is a little like hitting a homer off a position player pitcher. It seems cheap, although Ovechkin has defended the honor of empty net scorers by saying every goal is hard to score in this league. It's certainly hard for goalies, and I'm fine with many more empty net goals if it means a few more goalie goals. It reminds me of when baseball reached its peak home run rate several years ago. There were too many homers, but there were also more home run robberies, a rare but exciting event, so silver lining. I, for one, welcome our new net-minding snipers, because from Shohei Ohtani to Travis Hunter, two-way players are my favorite phenomenon in sports, and the goalie goal might be my favorite type of two-way play. Partly because it's so rare, partly because the shot travels so far that there's time for the suspense and satisfaction that come with a hole-in-one or a Hail Mary pass completion, and partly because the armored, mostly immobile men crouched in the crease look like the last people on the ice who could be capable of scoring. And usually they are, but I'm always happy when a goalie, whose lot in life is to take a ton of punishment and try to minimize the damage, turns the tables and gives the other team a cathartic taste of its own medicine. I'm also always happy when I have a chance to salute your Pittsburgh Penguins, Alex, so you're welcome.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, a couple of years in a row of goalie goals for the Penguins, and I can attest that they are quite nice when you have nothing else going on, as the Pittsburgh Penguins don't at this point in their franchise history.
If only the Pirates could have some form of goalie goal. I don't know what that would be, but we need that excitement. You could hear it in the broadcasters' voices. Often these games are out of hand, and yet nothing psychs you up more so than the spectacle of a goalie goal.
So just like, what a great name, goalie goal. That's just so fun to say.
It is.
Thank you so much, Ben. That is all for this episode, but we also have a bonus show that is live right now about a major crossroads for women's sports and college sports as a whole, as the Trump administration decides what to do or not do about something that was left for it by Joe Biden's people. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup. You can email us at hangup@slate.com. And do not forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Ben Lindbergh and for Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelma Beatty, and thanks for listening.